Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. Today's weather around the state, well, we saw a pretty big change in the weather pattern, particularly for the south central region of the state where we had been seeing some sunny, warm weather, and that kind of ended today as we have now transitioned into a cloudy pattern. But let's get started by taking a look first at our flood map and the breakup map. Essentially, we do have a flood advisory in effect until the early evening hours this evening for the circle area for the ice jam flooding. Otherwise, we don't have any more watches or warnings or advisories out just for that one particular region. Taking a look now at the fire dangers. Fire danger throughout the day has moderated considerably. It was high this morning over much of the south central region and southwestern Alaska on up into the Tanana Valley. Expect these conditions to moderate even more, especially over the south central region of the state and southwestern Alaska, as we're going to see an increase in clouds. The probability of rain is going to be increasing dramatically over this region, and that should definitely alleviate the fire danger situation, at least by tomorrow morning. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery over the state, and we can kind of see what's going on, but with respect to the moisture coming into the southern mainland, but more importantly, taking a look at this system up here over the Russian Far East. This system is going to be basically continuing to move on towards the Bering Sea and eventually wind up in that north central Bering Sea by Wednesday. Taking a look now at the satellite over the mainland, our GOES satellite. And as we put the loop in motion, you can see this moisture coming on up towards Kodiak Island. The low pressure system is down here south of the Alaska Peninsula, with the front basically extending through the Alaska Peninsula, spreading moisture, higher humidities, moisture and rain across that region. And this is going to basically entrain on up into southwestern Alaska, as we'll see when we discuss the weather a little bit more. Taking a look at the loop one more time. It doesn't show up on the map. Basically, this ridge of high pressure over the eastern Gulf and southeast Alaska or on the imagery, there was a significant low clouds and fog conditions right along the outer coastal areas, which was an issue throughout the day today, and that's going to remain an issue for the next day or so. Taking a look at our weather map around the state for today. We have this ridge of high pressure, as I was alluding to. It was actually rather cloudy throughout the Gulf of Alaska, along the North Gulf Coast, into the eastern interior, throughout southeast Alaska, although no real precipitation was falling. Rain was spreading into the southwest end of Kodiak Island, and that will continue to spread across the island to the Prince William Sound area. Along the Alaska Peninsula, the rain was just starting to spread over to that area by the afternoon hours. Cloudy conditions, cooler temperatures, increased humidities, big help as far as alleviating the fire danger, the wildland fire danger. Sunny conditions over the Kuskokwim Delta and towards the up the Yukon River Valley to the Brooks Range. Cloudy conditions along the Arctic coast, although we had this system up in the Arctic and this weaker system over the Chukotsk Peninsula, and that's spreading some snow into the Bering Strait region and just along the outer coast of northwestern Alaska. The Bering Sea itself, high pressure over the extreme western Aleutian Islands with the ridge over to into the Bering Sea. Cloudy conditions, except there was a significant break in the clouds across that central portion to the western portion of the Bering Sea. By tonight, expect our front to push on up, connecting into this frontal boundary all the way on up into the Arctic. Rain across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, western Prince William Sound, southern Cook Inlet, up along the Alaska Range, the Kuskokwim Valley down to the Bristol Bay region. Cloudy conditions over the Kuskokwim Delta and the Yukon Delta. Breaks in the clouds and mostly clear conditions, basically extending on up into the eastern Brooks Range. Cloudy conditions along the Arctic coast. Snow showers, some blowing snow issues can be expected from Barrow to the west overnight tonight, but that should be dying off by the morning hours. Snow showers through the Bering Strait down to the St. Matthew Island region. Down into the Gulf of Alaska, foggy conditions along the outer coast, Yakutat down to Sitka, cloudy conditions inland, and into the Aleutian Islands, basically cloudy conditions across the length of the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at the forecast now for Tuesday, low pressure system south of Kodiak Island, what's left of the front extending up along the Alaska range to a low pressure system in that eastern interior, which has a front down into the British Yukon Territory and British Columbia. The ridge of high pressure is kind of getting squeezed out in southeast Alaska. Some fog in the morning hours, otherwise mostly cloudy conditions there. Rain throughout the entirety of Prince William Sound, down to Kodiak Island, into Cook Inlet along the Alaska Range, continuing into the Kuskokwim Valley, right on down to Bristol Bay. Showers on the backside of this low pressure system across the Alaska Peninsula. So basically looking at this, the fire danger that was pretty high to extreme over much of the area is going to be mitigated by this increase in at least moisture. Up into the Tanana Valley region, you're probably going to see a little bit of rain, but not high amounts of rain. So it'll help keep the fire danger down, but only for a little while. Taking a look further north into the state, cloudy conditions spreading throughout the entirety of the state. Some snow is possible in the Kotzebue Sound area, right on down towards Norton Sound and the Nome area, the St. Lawrence Island area, and then up along the northwest Arctic coast. Still expecting to see a little bit of snow there. That should be tapering off throughout the day Tuesday. Into the Bering Sea, basically a big broad ridge of high pressure. Even though it's high pressure, typically in the Bering Sea, that equates to low clouds and fog, especially into the Pribilof Islands and throughout much of the Aleutian Islands themselves. Taking a look at the forecast now for Wednesday. Looking at our low pressure system moving into the Gulf of Alaska with the trough extending back from the low across Kodiak Island and basically tying on up into what's left of the low pressure system in the eastern interior. Weak ridge of high pressure over southeastern Alaska. Essentially, we're looking at here is cloudy conditions in southeast Alaska. Rainy, drizzly type conditions should persist throughout Prince William Sound down to Kodiak Island. With this trough extending on up into the Bristol Bay region, Lake Iliamna, expect rain or showers along this trough boundary. Some showers are possible along the north side of the Alaska Range. Also into the Tanana Valley, Upper Yukon Valley, chance that you may see some showers there. Chance of snow up along that eastern Arctic coastal area. Cloudy conditions throughout much of the Arctic coast, right on down across much of western Alaska to the Alaska Peninsula. And then we have our next system that's moving into the northern Bering Sea. Going to bring a chance of rain and snow to the St. Lawrence Island region. Rain possibly right on down to the Pribilof Islands, with some showery conditions trailing behind that low pressure system along its cold frontal boundary. Otherwise, the Aleutian Islands generally expect cloudier conditions to persist along the length of the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look now at our temperatures around the state today. In southeast Alaska, temperatures generally mid 40s to mid 50s, although 61 down in southern southeast Alaska. 40s and 50s along the North Gulf Coast, low 60s into the Cop River Basin. Cooler conditions up across the interior portion of the state, and that was mainly because of the increased cloud cover, so things definitely moderated compared to what we were seeing over the weekend. 40s and to low 50s down towards Kodiak Island. Up along the Arctic coast, temperatures remain below freezing along the Arctic coast. Basically north of the Brooks Range, temperatures remain below freezing. Down to Kotzebue Sound, getting right around that freezing mark, to the Norton Sound area as well, right around freezing. And then as we move on down into the southwestern part of the state, Bristol Bay region in the low 50s, 40s and 30s over the Kuskokwim Delta, 40s across the Alaska Peninsula, 30s over the Pribilof Islands and the eastern Aleutian Islands, with temperatures in the mid to upper 30s to low 40s over the Aleutian Islands themselves. Taking a look at low temperatures forecasted for tonight. Expect your temperatures to basically be in the 40s to upper 30s throughout southeast Alaska. Temperatures in the upper 30s to low 40s over the south central region. Mid 30s to low 30s over the eastern interior. To the Arctic coast, expect your temperatures basically to drop down in single digits to teens, 20s over the Seward Peninsula, 20s down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and then 30s and 40s over the Bristol Bay area to the Alaska Peninsula, as well as looking at 30s across the Aleutian Islands and mid-20s in the Pribilof Islands. For our highs tomorrow, expect temperatures in the 30s and 40s across the Aleutian Islands, 30s, mid-30s in the Pribilof Islands, 40s across the Alaska Peninsula. Expect your temperatures to be into the 50s in the Bristol Bay area, 30s along the coast of the Kuskokwim Delta, 40s inland, 50s as we move on up into the interior as well as south central Alaska. Some 60-degree readings in the Copper River Basin to the eastern Tanana Valley, 50s to low 60s across much of southeast Alaska. Taking a look at our flying weather for tomorrow, expect marginal conditions along the outer coastal areas of southeast Alaska, marginal to IFR conditions around Prince William Sound to Kodiak Island, marginal conditions across the Alaska Range, down across the Alaska Peninsula, as well as marginal conditions into the Pribilof Islands, IFR conditions in the St. Matthew Island region, marginal conditions up through the Bering Strait with some IFR conditions around Kotzebue Sound, some IFR conditions right along the northeast Arctic coast, and marginal conditions across much of the Aleutian Islands with some IFR conditions in the extreme western Aleutian Islands. For our passes tomorrow, expect VFR conditions for Anik-Tuvik Pass as well as Adigan Pass. Taking a look to the Alaska Range, marginal conditions, occasionally IFR conditions for both Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Rainy Path, also marginal, occasional IFR conditions through the pass there. Windy Path, marginal to occasional IFR conditions there as well. Isabel Pass as well as Mentasta Pass, generally VFR conditions. Off chance you might see some marginal conditions in Isabel Pass. Down to the Chugach Mountains and Tanita Pass, if we can get it going there. There we go. VFR conditions for Tanita Pass becoming marginal as we move on out later into the day. Taking a look at Portage Pass, marginal conditions there. And then down into southeast Alaska for Chilkoot and White Pass. VFR conditions early on in the day, by late in the day, possibly getting to marginal conditions there. Taking a look at our freezing levels. Freezing levels over southeast Alaska around 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Freezing levels over much of the mainland south central Alaska, 6,000 to 4,000 feet, sloping down to about 2,000 feet, and eventually to the surface as we get to the Brooks Range. Freezing levels about 2,000 to 4,000 feet over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, with 4,000 feet in the Bristol Bay area. And freezing levels across the Aleutian Islands, 2,000 feet in the central Aleutian Islands, back up to about 6,000 feet as we get out to the western Aleutian Islands, and surface freezing levels across the northern portions of the Bering Sea. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, some isolated moderate rime icing from your freezing level to 9,000 feet, St. Matthew Island on up through the St. Lawrence Island region, as well as up along the northwest Arctic coast, and then over the south central region, particularly Kodiak Island, the outer coast of Prince William Sound, the Alaska Range. Widespread moderate rime icing could be expected from the freezing level to 18,000 feet, with some isolated rime icing from your freezing level to about 18,000 feet over the Alaska Peninsula and into the Susitna Valley and portions of Prince William Sound. Taking a look at our jet stream for tomorrow. Expect your jet stream, there's one branch of the jet's about 60 knots, the weaker branch, coming into the Norton Sound area and then over the northeast Arctic coast at about 55 knots. Then we also have our jet stream coming off of the Kamchatka Peninsula about 115 knots, down to about 100 knots south of the Aleutian Islands, 65 knots as we get south of the Gulf of Alaska, and then as we continue on down towards the coast of California, back up to about 80 knots. Taking a look now down to the 9,000 foot level. Expect your winds over southeast Alaska about 10 to 15 knots. Same thing along the eastern interior, but about 30 knot winds coming up into the south central region, up into the eastern Brooks Range, 15 to 25 knot winds over northwestern Alaska, out across the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands over the top of that ridge, about 25 to 30 knot winds right across the central to eastern Aleutian Islands, with about 15 knot winds over the Adak-Amchitka area. Down to the 3,000 foot level, expect your winds about 20 to 25 knots over the western to central Aleutian Islands, 15 knots to 10 knots over much of the Bering Sea, to 25 knots as we get over the eastern Aleutian Islands to the western Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at the mainland, generally light winds over much of the southwestern Alaska, and then we see the winds increasing a bit as we get up to the Arctic coast from basically Barrow east, 20 knot winds there. 10 knot winds across Kodiak Island, 10 knot winds across the Prince William Sound area to the eastern interior, and across southeast Alaska, generally 10 to 15 knot winds, that ridging and onshore type flow pattern associated with that. And in the Gulf of Alaska itself, Further south, you expect 20 to 25 knot winds to 35 knot winds just south of Kodiak Island. And that takes us to our turbulence map. Really not expecting any significant turbulence throughout the state, although over the eastern Aleutian Islands there's a chance you may see some light turbulence below 3,000 feet, occasionally intermittently moderate turbulence there. Same thing out in the extreme western Aleutian Islands. But that about wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Travis Klum. Travis is the Director of Flight Operations for Cirrus Aircraft. Originally a farm boy from South Dakota, Travis developed an early interest in aviation, worked as a CFI at the University of North Dakota, before becoming involved with Cirrus. Cirrus has been doing some very innovative things in aircraft design, training, and safety. It's a pleasure to have Travis here to talk about some of these items. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Harry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking a historical question. Talk about the safety record then and now.
You know, when Cirrus first started producing airplanes in the early 2000s, our safety record was, for fatal accidents per 100,000 flight hours, slightly worse than general aviation as a whole. But it was a brand new airplane. Pilots and flight instructors weren't really familiar with how to fly it correctly or teach in it. But what we've seen over the years, starting in 2012, we actually have a better safety record now than general aviation as a whole, and it continues to trend downward.
Now talk about the numbers you gave me for 2013 and even for 2014 to date. Those are amazing numbers. What are they again?
Yeah, we're very happy with the numbers. So general aviation fatal accidents per 100,000 flight hours have been pretty flatlined at about 1.24 accidents per 100,000 flight hours. And Cirrus actually, in 2012, we were at 1.14, and in 2013, we're at 1.01. And in 2014, year to date, we're looking very good at less than one fatal accident per 100,000 flight hours.
That's remarkable. Congratulations. In fact, take the opportunity to mention to our audience, I had a chance to fly with you when you're up here for the trade show. What an amazing aircraft. And some of the innovations in it, I'd like you to talk a little bit about particularly the safety innovations. Let's start with the fact that it's under Part 23 for crashworthiness. What are some of the innovations?
Yes, certifying an aircraft to the new Part 23 standard is quite a bit different than the way the older aircraft were certified under Part 3. Things like higher crashworthiness for seats. You probably noticed that our seats don't go up and down, and that's because they have to meet a much tougher standard for G-loading for crashworthiness. We have a roll cage in our aircraft, much like a modern car, so that in the event of a crash, the occupants inside that cabin compartment are protected. We sacrifice other parts of the airplane to absorb some of the energy. We also have our firewall is beveled on the bottom so that the aircraft will skip across the ground rather than dig in. We have airbag seat belts, and most notably, something that Cirrus has that's not required by Part 23, but is a whole airframe ballistic parachute.
Let's talk about the parachute, because that clearly is a game changer.
It has been, and we put the parachute on the aircraft from day one. One of our co-founders of the company was involved in a mid-air collision earlier in his career of flying, and that affected him in a very profound way, and he thought, you know, pilots make mistakes and get into situations that they simply can't control. There has to be a better way than to simply ride it in. And so we designed this airplane with the parachute in mind, and it's standard equipment on every single Cirrus aircraft that's ever been produced, and it's worked extremely well.
Talk about the numbers. What's the safety record when the parachute was deployed under the parameters it was designed to?
Yeah, so when we tested the parachute and demonstrated it to the FAA, we came up with some parameters that the parachute should be deployed in. And generally speaking, in level flight, you need about 400 feet of altitude to get fully stabilized. In a spin, we demonstrated it can fully recover in 920 feet. And the airspeed should be below our VA speed, which is anywhere from 133 to 140 knots depending on the airframe. And every single time it's been deployed within those parameters, every single person has walked away successfully.
And how many times was that?
We've saved about 87 lives in a little over 40 deployments of the parachute.
That's an amazing story. We're going to run out of time here, probably, but I want to get you back on, and I want to talk about Cirrus's training program, because it was apparent to me the mindset that you all have. I mean, just to witness the parachute, the crashworthiness, safety is foremost in your mind. So let's plan on doing that, get back and talk about training, and particularly in how to employ or when to employ or deploy the parachute. So thanks for being on the show tonight, and we'll get you back on and talk more about Cirrus's training program.
Thank you, Harry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. Travis, as the director of flight operations of a really pretty amazing company with some very, very safety-minded equipment. We'll talk more about that. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation is member funded. Go to our website, aasfonline.com. Become a member if you aren't a member, and renew for 2014 if you're already a member. And until next time, fly safe.
Welcome back, and let's get started by taking a look at the marine forecast for tomorrow for southeast Alaska. Southern inside waters 15 knots out of the west, northwest. Variable winds 10 knots in the middle part of the southern inside waters, and then up towards Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay, expected pretty good sea breeze, south winds 30 knots there. Outer coastal areas generally pretty benign conditions, about 10 knots to 15 knots until you get up to just off of the east Gulf Coast here by Yakutat. Expected winds southeast at 20 knots there. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday. Winds in the southern panhandle, actually that was mistakenly drawn there. They should be a southwesterly to southerly wind there at 15 knots. South winds 10 knots in the central panhandle to 20 knots up in Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. And all along the southern outside waters to the east Gulf Coast, expect your winds out of the southeast around 20 knots. For the south central waters, expect your winds to be out of the east 20 to 25 knots along the north Gulf Coast toward the Barren Islands, southeast 15 in Prince William Sound. Around Kodiak Island, generally pretty light winds around 15 knots out of the east northeast. Some 25 knot winds over the Augustine area, with northeast winds about 15 knots in the Cook Inlet region. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday, conditions settle down a bit in Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots there. 15 knot winds around the Augustine area. 15 knot northeasterly winds down Shelikof Strait as well as south of Kodiak Island. Northeast winds 20 knots from the Barren Islands to the over towards south of Hinchinbrook, not Hinchinbrook, Cape Montague Island. 25 knot winds south of the Sound, with 15 knot winds out of the northeast in Prince William Sound itself. For Tuesday, over the Alaska Peninsula, east winds 15 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 knots in Bristol Bay. North and northeast winds 20 to 25 knots over the western Alaska Peninsula. By Wednesday, we'll see the winds out of the north to northwest 20 knots over the western Alaska Peninsula, northwest 20 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, with northwest winds 15 knots in that Bristol Bay area. Taking a look at the forecast now for Tuesday across the Aleutian Islands. North winds 30 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands, 25 to 30 knots as we go a little bit further to the central Aleutian Islands, to 20 to 25 knots as we get out towards Adak, with west winds at 20 knots over the Amchitka area and west winds 20 knots as we move on out towards Shemya. By Wednesday, the winds are going to increase to southwest 25 knots over the Shemya to Amchitka area, dropping off to 20 knots out of the west-southwest over the Adak area, to 20 knots out of the west over the eastern Aleutian Islands right on over towards Unalaska. Taking a look now at the Bering Sea coastal waters, the Pribilof Islands northwest winds at 15 knots. Expect your winds to be north to northwest 10 to 25 knots. Lighter over the north of Nunivak Island, stronger as we get down towards Kuskokwim Bay. West winds 20 knots over the St. Matthew Island region, with northwest winds 15 knots in the St. Lawrence Island waters. On Wednesday, expect your winds to be out of the west 20 knots in the Pribilof Islands, southwest 20 knots as we go on up to St. Matthew Island. South to southwest winds 15 knots. St. Lawrence Island down towards the north side of Nunivak Island with west to northwest winds 20 knots outside of Kuskokwim Bay. Taking a look now at the Arctic coastal waters for Tuesday. Generally pretty light winds. Variable winds 10 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound over around towards Point Lay. Southwest 15 over by Barrow. South winds 15 by Prudhoe Bay with east winds to southeast 15 towards Kaktovik. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday. Expect your winds generally variable 10 knots over the entirety of the Arctic coastal waters. So things are really settling down up there. Very light winds during the day Wednesday. Taking a look now for a quick recap at conditions for tonight. Do remember that we do have that ice jam flood advisory up towards the Circle area just for the evening hours. That we expect that the ice jam will likely break, but that's hard to tell with ice jams. So do pay attention to the forecasts that are out for that. With our low pressure system south of the Alaska Peninsula with this front extending on up into the Kuskokwim Valley, expect rain across Kodiak Island to western Prince William Sound over the southwest portion of the state and Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula right on up into the Kuskokwim Valley. Cloudy conditions as we move on up towards the Seward Peninsula. Some snow showers over the St. Lawrence Island area, snow showers with some blowing snow over the northwest Arctic coast from Barrow to the west. Southeast Alaska, generally pretty benign conditions, but you may see some pretty foggy conditions overnight outside of Yakutat down towards the Sitka area. Taking a look at the forecast again for Tuesday, our low pressure system is moving south of Kodiak Island. What's left of the front extends along the Alaska Range across southwestern Alaska to a weak low in that eastern interior region. Expect some rain along this frontal boundary down towards Kodiak Island as well as into much of Prince William Sound and southern Cook Inlet, alleviating much of the high fire danger that we have been experiencing. But I'm out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.